In recent months I have been referred to as Grizzly Man or Bear Man on Facebook. No doubt for all the grizzly bear photos I post. I certainly don't claim to be an expert on grizzly bears, so the nickname is somewhat overstated. However, I do have an overwhelming attraction to these magnificent creatures. There are so many more people out there who have had much more serious encounters with these bears than me. But this is my story. And it begins like this. Growing up in Oregon and Washington states through the 50s and early 60s, I certainly would not have seen too many bears and definitely not any grizzlies. It was so exciting just to see a deer. I thought, as most people did, that grizzlies were horrible bloodthirsty killers, and meeting up with one means certain death. That was my mindset. Even though I never really thought about meeting a grizzly in those days. My dad co-owned a logging company at the time, and at the end of my junior year of high school, spring 1965, he got a job offer from a sawmill in West Yellowstone Mountain, so my dad and his partner packed up their families and the families of their loyal employees and all their logging equipment. Not an easy task. And moved to Montana. I remember how excited I was, as I had just gotten my first driver's license and was able to drive a car all by myself for 600 or 700 miles without an adult looking over my shoulder. There were several cars that had to make the trip, and I got to be one of the drivers. It was a long, tiring trip, but we eventually made it. In those days, there were no interstate highways along our route. Dad and his partner bought double-wide mobile homes, and they were set up and waiting for us when we arrived in West Yellowstone. Where I was from, moving to Montana was like entering into a different world from what we were used to. I remember going outside and looking down the street. It was like being in a mountain camp. The quietness, the log cabins with wood smoke drifting up through the trees, and the sweet smell of pine in the air. I was very shy and not too outgoing at first, so meeting new kids my age was somewhat of a challenge to me. That summer, the summer of 1965, would be the time where that hidden mindset I mentioned earlier about bears would be brought to the forefront. Because unknown to us, we had moved right into the middle of bear country. But to be more specific, grizzly country. When I first heard the stories that you could actually drive out to the garbage dump and watch these horrific monsters feeding on garbage right in front of your car in the headlights. Well, at the first opportunity, my friend Dennis and I decided to try it out. We took his car out to the dump just before it got dark, parked and waited. Oddly, we were the only ones out there that night. Sitting there all by ourselves, we both started experiencing real fear as it started to creep in on us, and soon after we noticed a huge black figure coming over the berm and walking in our direction. It must have been a sight to behold. These two brave teenagers from the city start the car, and we tore out of there, spinning the tires, throwing gravel like buckshot in all directions. We were terrified. As the summer went by, I felt a little embarrassed by my response to that first encounter, so I mustered up the courage to go back to the dump, the fear subsiding, and enjoyed watching them from the safety of the car. In the 3 summers that I visited the dump, 65, 66, and 67, I know of no one who was injured, or worse, even though people were doing stupid things, like getting out of the car to snap a photograph. Watching the grizzlies at the local dump was a major tourist attraction, and no doubt, people wanting to get a glimpse of our famous star attraction, Snaggletooth. A big boy with a chewed-off ear, missing claw on his left front paw, blind in one eye, and of course, the disfigurement that gave him his name. The crooked canine tooth that protruded from his lower jaw. He was very recognizable, and I was able to see him many times during those 3 summers. On several occasions you could find large buses parked out there along with cars, lined up, like a drive-in theater. During those 3 summers it was not uncommon to see lots of black bears in town at night, following their noses to any and all of the easily obtainable garbage cans around town. That was long before the bear-proof cans that we see today. Many nights I would pull into our driveway and see a black bear that was helping himself to our garbage. One night I was leaving by the back door and stepped right out next to a big blackie. I don't know which one of us jumped the highest. I ran back in the house, and he went the other direction. He was gone when I came back out. I can't remember if we ever installed a back porch light or not. By the next summer, the summer of 1966, I had just finished my senior year of high school, and had made friends with most of the local kids. It had been a long winter by the likes of something I had never witnessed in my life. The contrast of being from Walla Walla, Washington, where we might get 3 or 4 inches of snow all year long, to a West Yellowstone winter, where you can walk down the street and not be able to see the buildings behind the massive snowbanks left by the snowplow. We would drive down the streets at night, and being dumb kids, when we approached an intersection there was no way to see if a car was coming, so we got the bright idea of just turning off the headlights for a second to see if there were approaching headlights from the other direction. Real smart, huh? So, it's summer again, and believe it or not, the dump was still a popular attraction for me because I was just fascinated by those big bears. I never got tired of watching them. I wish I'd had the camera equipment that I have now. The list of things to do in summertime West Yellowstone was much longer than the winter list, for obvious reasons, and through this summer and the next winter, life in West was kind of a mirror image of the previous year, with just a few exceptions. I had made friends with a lot of the guys my age, but being a very late bloomer, I still struggled with the confidence it took to approach the young ladies. But, as things go, it eventually come to pass. Which brings us to the summer of 1967. This summer would bring about the beginning of monumental changes in grizzly bear management in the lower 48 states due to the tragic events of August 13 that shocked the nation, when two 19-year-old girls were killed in Glacier National Park, on the same night, by two different bear. It confounded the experts, and to this day is still referred to, more than 50 years later, as the Night of the Grizzlies. My heart-stopping encounter happened, just a few weeks before, and lucky for me turned out much better. I have absolutely no recollection of the date on this night, just that it was sometime in the early summer. It was more than likely during the heavy part of the tourist season judging by the number of cars at the dump that night. Going out to watch the Grizzlies had become routine for me. So, being the romantic guy that I was, I picked up my young lady friend, and we headed out to the dump. On our arrival, just before dark, we were able to find an open spot, and squeezed in between two other cars, and waited for the show to begin. The bears' routine was to come up from below the hill to the garbage that was spread on the ground in front of the cars. Quite often you could hear them growling at each other in the darkness, down over the hill. It was spine-tingling for sure, but fascinating to hear. What happened next would awaken that dark emotion of sheer terror that we all have, but keep hidden and controlled. For the most part, it was just about dark. I had just in the last few months started smoking, so I had my window rolled down my arm, with cigarette in hand, was hanging out in the cool night air. Then, a movement through the side rearview mirror caught my eye. A big grizzly had come from out of the forest behind us, and was walking up between my car and the car next to me. Its huge head swaying from side to side, passing only a few inches from my arm hanging out the window, breathing in and out, with a low deep raspy sound. It was just there, right beside my door. No warning. I couldn't move, probably best that I hadn't. Then it was by us, and out in front of my car. I just sat there for a couple of minutes, numb, I think, while my brain processed what had just happened. What happened was one of the most powerful carnivores on the planet had just walked past me with all those long yellow teeth, and lucky for me decided not to take a bite out of my arm. There is no doubt that he knew my arm was there. Was this Snaggletooth? Could have been, but I honestly don't know. My life could have taken a whole different path that night, but as it was, it turned out to be a very memorable date indeed. It just happens, the young lady that was with me that night is one of my Facebook friends. I haven't seen her in over 50 years, so it would be interesting if she remembers it like I do, or even remembers it at all. Maybe she just remembers it as the time a guy took her to the dump on a date. I'm chuckling as I write this. One thing is for sure, that night I was forever hooked on the mighty grizzly bear. Even though I have not had any other experiences like that, I am still in awe of them whenever I see them. With my photography I try to portray them as the magnificent creations that they certainly are.
Oh, and by the way, she doesn't remember this incident at all.